I'm going to talk about something that is something we are working on quite extensively at the moment, but also it's something that I think is one of the fundamental challenges in security, whether you're a business, you're an individual. So hands up, anybody who left home and actually locked their doors today. Okay, hands up who worried about if somebody got in, what things they might try to steal. A few people. Okay, and I think that basically sums up what the problem in security research is. I mean, generally our perceptions of security come from more or less the military domain or our personal experiences, and they all tend to be very much about perimeter protection. However, we need to remember that determined attackers, earlier speakers have talked about advanced persistent threats, basically state-sponsored hackers or hacktivist groups or so on. Determined attackers will get in. And in fact, sometimes they will sit on a network or in an organization for over 200 days, okay, waiting for the right opportunity, having access to the right sort of data. Okay. Equally, sometimes they will sit in on one network, for example, a partner organization that supplies your organization, and wait until an opportunity opens or a channel opens to get into their real target. Okay. So security and cybersecurity is much more than just breaches. We always hear about breaches in the news. Okay, we always hear about how do you protect at the perimeter. We think about firewalls, we think about antiviruses, we think about all sorts of things. What we don't think enough about is what happens once the attackers get in, and can we make it more difficult for them to actually take data out of systems? Because ultimately, data is the value that you're trying to protect. So before I move on, I want to say that a number of people within our center are actually engaged in this piece of work. Some of them are in the room, so please raise your hands and wave. And go on. So they will also be around, not just myself, so they can also talk to you about what we are working on. So we talk a lot about security, but there are lots of challenges that face organizations on a yearly basis, actually on a daily basis. So the recent IBM Cybersecurity Intelligence Index actually provides some very interesting results. They looked at all the data that they collect from their security operations around the world, and they're of the view that annually, on average, in a single organization, there are 73,400 attacks, 90 incidents where some sort of breach has actually occurred. Over 50 to 75% of these attacks come from outside, malicious actors, and 23% are either motivated by industrial espionage, financial crime, terrorism, or data theft. Okay, so that's what a single organization on average faces every day. We should also remember that there is no perfect cybersecurity. Okay, so as I said, attackers will get in at some point in time, and you always need to think about the fact that when you are trying to protect the system, it is not just about protecting the outside of the system, but actually thinking about once attackers get in, how do you protect them? We all know about the hack at RSA. Okay, all it took was 2 employees clicking on a malicious email, and all the security went up in smoke. Okay, and the knock-on effect on the whole industry and everybody who was using RSA products or services or certificates was huge. And as I said, determined attackers will gain access. Whether they are insiders or they are people who are, for example, advanced persistent threats operating out of certain countries around the world and trying to gain access to intellectual property or state secrets. So we need to think beyond breaches, and if we assume that at some point a breach in our security measures will take place, then what can we do, okay, to detect, stop, or at least disrupt data being taken out of the system? Again, it's impossible to have 100% security, but if you can actually make it difficult for attackers. If you think about it, an attack is effectively a continuum. It starts by an attacker scanning your system, okay, and trying to gain intelligence about the system. Then they actually try to attack the system, achieve a breach, and then they establish their own structures within the system, okay? Some kind of a command and control mechanism that allows them to actually take data out of the system. And if it is that latter bit that we also need to think about. Once the attacker has gotten in, how do we actually spot the telltale signs that somebody is actually sitting in on the system, okay? Or also the telltale signs that they're actually trying to take data out of the system that shouldn't be going out of the system, or at least not going to the different services online that it is actually being sent to. So to do this, you need to understand what kind of things that attackers do to take data out of the system. So we are assuming that attackers have gotten in, and what do we do? So we have been looking quite extensively at a wide range of things that are reported in literature, and this is what we find. Okay, so there are lots of sort of covert channels that attackers might use. Timing channels tend to be a very popular thing. The usual thing about protocol tunneling, so you can have all sorts of mechanisms in place, but people will create a tunnel through the protocol, so you can't see what's going through the tunnel, steganography, and so on. But there are also the usual suspects, okay? So you don't need to be very sophisticated, and you don't need to be very clever to actually take data out of system. All you need is, send data out via email. FTP servers tend to be very common. Okay, a very common command and control mechanism for attackers to take data out of systems. And here are the sort of newer bits, So instant messaging protocols. Okay, people are using quite a lot of those. Simple HTTP, you can upload stuff from within a network to different hosting sites that you control as an attacker. Okay, but also you can do downloads via the typical SQL injection attacks that we see all the time. Peer-to-peer file sharing systems. Okay. Quite an interesting mode, and quite a lot of things that people do all the time, and use them as a way to bypass quite a lot of security mechanisms within an organization. You also need to know how to detect these things, and there are techniques out there that will allow you to detect these things. Oh, if I can actually get this to work. Make sure you monitor network traffic at a boundary. Okay, so it's not just about stopping breaches coming in. You need to think about what's going in and out of the system, and establish a boundary, or maybe a set of boundaries at which you check different types of network traffic that goes out. Watermark your data, okay, electronically, to both help monitoring traffic at the boundary, but also trace where leaks might be coming from. Because it's not just about the fact that you may spot that somebody is taking data out of the system. You need to actually understand from where they are taking data out of the system, what is the path that is being taken, how do you spot, and how do you remove and do the cleanup effort. You need to detect unusual access patterns at the host. Okay. But also, you need to model your information flow. You need to understand how you expect information to flow out of your organization. Okay? When all of a sudden certain components start to participate in that information flow, then you actually have some suspected leaker components, so to speak. I should also hold my hand up and say, yes, this also means that there is an interesting privacy question here. Okay? Because employees in an organization may not like the fact that their activity or their traffic is being monitored. Okay? And that is an interesting question that needs to be squared somehow. And take preventive measures. Okay? It's important that network monitors have the ability to mask data. Okay? And I really do mean mask data, which is that if they suspect that this is data that shouldn't be going out of the system, then they may let the data go out of the system, but fill that up with some garbage. Okay? So that the attacker may think that they've managed to take data out of the system, but that is just garbage. Okay? And that kind of automated systems are available. But also, you should give network monitors the ability to actually disallow traffic from going out of the system, if that is what is required to protect data. And this all ties in with watermarking data, as we were talking about before. Okay? You need some kind of self-protection for data. There are technologies out there, including something that is more DRM-like systems that use encryption and make sure that even if data is taken out of the system, it is not actually readable. Okay. There are intelligent databases and file systems available that will detect malicious queries and prevent access. And of course, the good old thing, properly delete and secure old data. Okay? Usually the trash bins on computers are a very good source for attackers to look for stuff which nobody will remember was put in there in the first place. Okay, and of course, always physically isolate sensitive data from the internet. There are, again, ways around that, and we all know how hackers got into the Pentagon by distributing free USB sticks at a conference like this. We are not giving out free USB sticks, I think, today. But there is, again, it's important to make it difficult for attackers to actually get at sensitive data from the internet. So we look at just one example. There is loads and loads of examples that we can talk about. Dexter, which is a point of sale RAM scraping attack. Okay, this is a malware that targets point of sale machines, and this is the distribution that you can see around the world. And you can see that the UK is doing pretty well in being attacked by Dexter. In fact, which is interesting. It harvests credit card numbers and then sends the data to a command and control center that it establishes itself. Most of the infected point of sales actually run on Windows platforms. Okay. And there are 200 to 300 attacks across 40 countries that have been discovered. So what do we do? If you want to understand this, and there is quite a lot of detail behind this, and I won't go through that, but you really need to understand the anatomy of the attack. What kind of things that Dexter as a malware might do, or this type of malware might do. Okay, and first of all, there is terminal infection that goes on. Then host data sent for target identification. There are commands going from the malware to command and control server, and there is parsing of memory dumps and credit card data going on as well. And there is lots of details underneath which I won't go into now. But once you understand the anatomy of attacks and how different types of attacks work, then as a defender of an organization, you actually can start to put in place barriers. Okay. And all these little walls that you see, they are barriers that can actually protect against Dexter or Dexter kind of attacks. Okay, so you've got using signature-based intrusion detection systems on your point of sale terminal. Okay, or you've got perimeter firewalls, you've got end-to-end encryption for card transactions, and so on and so forth. Okay, and what we do at Lancaster is we actually understand the anatomies of these kind of attacks. We actually work on unraveling these attacks and then understanding what kind of barriers will actually help you stop these kind of attacks, or at least disrupt. So even if your terminal gets infected by the Dexter malware, does it make it harder for it to establish the command and control structures that it would need to actually get the data out of the system? There is a lot more of these case studies that I could go into. We will be finishing a very detailed analysis early in the new year, and we'll be issuing a report, but also doing briefings to industry and a range of industry organizations. And we will be sure to actually send an invitation to everybody in this room, and you're most welcome to come and attend those when we get to that. And finally, of course, everything we look at as researchers, we look at, of course, the here and now, but we also look at where the future threats may come from, and we've talked about quite a few of those today, but there is lots of mobility of workers and devices, and they themselves pose lots of challenges in terms of protecting against data leakage from an organization. Workers may be using untrusted networks. Sorry, I have a terrible cold, and I just keep on. Workers may be using untrusted networks or untrusted environments. People have mentioned cloud and virtualization as another big challenge. There is lots of use of collaborative tools for work. People use all sorts of instant messaging applications and social networking platforms for their work, and they themselves provide vectors for data leakage out of an organization. And of course, as I mentioned, there are really complex supply chains. Lots of organizations interact, and really, ultimately, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. As I said, attackers will sit at the network of a partner organization waiting for a door to open into the organization that they really want to get into. They won't do anything to the first organization. So you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain, but also don't be the weakest link either. And that's why it's important to understand all these things. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.